The brass key fought me inside the rusted padlock. I twisted harder. Metal scraped against metal. The gate opened 6 inches, then stopped against a wall of weeds. "Dad, whatever you do not call Grant." The voice came from somewhere behind the overgrown courtyard. My hand locked around the iron bar. For one impossible second, even the Atlantic wind seemed to stop. A man stepped out from beneath the old oak tree. He was thin, slightly stooped, and dressed in a faded gray sweater. Premature gray cut through his dark hair. A thick scar ran from his right temple, down beneath his collar. Then he tilted his head to the left, the way he had whenever he tried to hear something clearly as a child. My knees nearly gave way. "Nathan?" He did not smile. He did not reach for me. He lifted a faded orange life jacket. Black marker across the strap read N. Mercer. "Grant told you I took the boat," he said. "I never made it out of the boathouse. 7 years earlier, a storm had swallowed my 36-year-old son. We searched the coastline, dragged the inlet, and eventually buried an empty casket. In the year 2024, a judge declared him legally dead. Yet Nathan was standing behind the gate of the beach house I had not visited in 26 years. The same house my wife, Claire, had visited 4 times every year. The same house Grant and Olivia demanded I sell the morning after we buried their mother. I could still hear Grant in my office, pushing the manila folder toward me. "Sign it now, Dad." Olivia had already obtained the land appraisal and demolition estimate. They called the house a dead asset. They wanted the structures cleared before the end of the month. I refused for one reason. Claire had hidden a note inside my watch box. "Before you sell anything, open the gate yourself." Now I understood why. I stepped through the narrow opening and stared at Nathan's face. My mind searched desperately for a rational explanation. A grieving father could see what he wanted to see. A clever imposter could study photographs and family records. "What did your grandfather call you after you broke his fishing rod?" I asked. Nathan swallowed. "Captain Chaos." "Where is the dent in our old kitchen table?" "Under the left leaf." I dropped Mom's cast iron skillet. My throat tightened. "What were the last words I said to you before the storm?" Nathan closed his eyes. Pain pulled the scar tight against his neck. His hand rose to his temple. "I do not know," he whispered. Some memories never came back. The frustration in his voice was familiar. So was the shame that followed it. It was him. I stepped forward, but Nathan immediately moved back. "Why did you not come home?" I demanded. "Your mother spent 7 years mourning you. Mom found me 11 months ago." The words hit harder than seeing him alive. "Claire knew? She brought me here. She told me to wait until you opened the gate yourself." I reached instinctively for the phone inside my coat. Nathan raised the life jacket between us. "Do not call Grant. Do not use the company network. The camera across the road belongs to Mercer Coastal Transit." I looked back through the gate. A small black security lens sat high on the utility pole, pointed directly at the driveway. "Grant knows you are here?" I asked. "He knows someone is here. If he learns you have seen me, he will try to make me disappear on paper again." I followed Nathan into the house. It was not abandoned. The air conditioner hummed. The floors were clean. 3 amber prescription bottles stood on the kitchen counter beneath the name Evan Cole. A wall calendar hung above the telephone. Claire had marked maintenance visits in blue, medical appointments in red, and legal meetings in green. Across the final 11 months of her life, 20 dates carried a single black letter. Beside the calendar was a photograph of Claire standing next to Nathan in the same kitchen. The timestamp showed it had been taken 6 months earlier. I stared at my wife's smile. She had eaten dinner across from me while knowing our son was alive. "She did not know whether she could trust you," Nathan said behind me. I turned sharply. "Trust me with what?" "With the truth about what Grant and Olivia did." Heavy tires crushed the oyster shells outside. Nathan's face lost all color. "He is already here." Nathan's face lost all color. He backed away from the kitchen window, his breathing suddenly shallow and ragged. "He is already here. You did not call anyone, did you?" "I came alone," I said, my heart slamming against my ribs. "We have to go to the boathouse," Nathan said, grabbing my sleeve. He pulled me toward the back door, but after 2 steps, he staggered, clutching his head, paralyzed by a sudden, invisible pain. The trauma response hijacked his body, rooting him to the floorboards. Car doors slammed outside. Heavy footsteps marched up the wooden stairs to the front porch. The front door swung open, hitting the wall with a loud, violent crack. Grant stepped into the hallway. He was wearing his tailored charcoal suit, perfectly composed, not a single hair out of place. Right behind him stood a uniformed county sheriff's deputy with his hand resting near his duty belt. Grant looked past me, his eyes locking directly onto Nathan, who was leaning against the kitchen counter, trembling. Grant did not look surprised. He did not drop to his knees in shock at seeing his dead brother. His expression remained entirely flat, cold, and calculated. "Dad, step away from him," Grant said, his voice smooth and authoritative, echoing off the wooden walls. "I do not know how this man got in here, but he is dangerous. That man is not Nathan." I looked from Grant to the son standing beside me. "What are you talking about?" Grant pointed at Nathan. "His name is Evan Cole. He is an unstable drifter trying to extort our family." Nathan leaned closer to me. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were completely lucid. He kept his gaze locked on his brother, and his voice dropped to a barely audible whisper near my ear. "That is the name he gave the facility after he found me." Grant stood in the center of the kitchen, blocking the exit. The deputy kept his right hand resting casually on his utility belt. My oldest son reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out a folded stack of papers. He tossed them onto the kitchen island. The heavy bond paper slapped against the granite countertop, a sharp sound that echoed in the quiet room. "His legal name is Evan Cole," Grant said. His tone was perfectly practiced, the same steady, reassuring voice he used to soothe anxious shareholders during quarterly earnings calls. He is a former resident of a state-funded care facility. He has a history of targeting grieving families and wealthy estates. I stepped closer to the island and picked up the papers. The top sheet was the official court order declaring Nathan Mercer legally dead, signed and dated 2 years ago. Beneath it sat the old internal embezzlement report, and below that lay a copy of the typed letter Grant claimed Nathan wrote before fleeing into the storm 7 years ago. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and saw Olivia's name flashing on the screen. Grant gestured toward the phone, waiting for me to answer. I tapped the speaker button and set the device next to the stack of legal documents. "Dad," Olivia said. Her voice trembled, thick with tears that sounded entirely genuine, a perfect performance of a distressed daughter. "Grant texted me what happened. You have to get out of that house right now. Mom was not well this past year. Her mind was slipping. That man manipulated her into letting him stay there." I looked at the man standing near the sink. He possessed Nathan's jawline, Nathan's defensive stance, Nathan's scar. I shifted my gaze back to Grant. A normal brother confronting an intruder pretending to be a dead sibling would ask questions. A normal person would demand to know how this stranger knew our family history. Grant did not ask a single question. He did not want to investigate. He just wanted this man removed from the property. "If this individual cannot produce a deed or a signed lease," the deputy said, stepping forward, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, "I have to detain him for trespassing and potential identity theft." The back door sat just 3 feet from Nathan. The lock was unlatched. He could have bolted into the marshland. Instead, he straightened his posture and stepped away from the counter, planting his feet firmly on the hardwood floor. "I will gladly submit to a DNA test," Nathan said, addressing the deputy directly rather than engaging with his brother. "I will give my fingerprints. I will provide dental records, but I will only do it through an independent attorney, not through Mercer Coastal Transit or their legal team." Grant let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "You do not get to dictate terms, Evan, and I am not going anywhere near Harborview Residential Home again," Nathan added, his voice hardening, his eyes locked on Grant. The change in the room was microscopic, but undeniable. Grant's jaw clenched. The practiced ease dropped from his shoulders for a fraction of a second. My executive son recognized the name of that specific facility, and he absolutely hated that Nathan had said it aloud in front of a police officer. I raised my hand, palm out, signaling the deputy to stop his advance. "Nobody is detaining anyone today." "Dad, you are in shock," Grant said, stepping closer, switching back to the concerned son routine. "Mom just died. We buried her yesterday. You are grieving, and you are not thinking clearly. Let the police do their job." I ignored him and opened the kitchen drawer beneath the wall phone. Claire always kept a backup file for important house documents there. My fingers brushed past spare brass keys and old takeout menus until they hit a thick plastic sleeve. The plastic felt cold and rigid. I pulled it out. Inside rested a notarized legal agreement. I unfolded the thick paper, smoothed it flat on the counter, and read the text aloud. This document grants temporary residential rights to NM at the Seabrook Point property, effective immediately, for the purpose of medical recovery and identity restoration. At the bottom of the page sat Claire's signature. Next to it was the raised seal and stamp of a local notary public. She had carefully used initials to keep Nathan off public radar, but the legal intent was ironclad. I handed the document to the deputy. The officer scanned the page, his expression shifting from authoritative to uncomfortable. He rubbed the back of his neck and handed the paper back to me. "This is a civil dispute now, sir. The owner of record gave him explicit written permission to be here. I cannot forcibly remove him without a court order." Grant's face flushed red, the dark color creeping up his neck from his pristine white collar. That signature was clearly coerced. "That is for a judge to decide," I said. "Not you." I picked up my phone, ended the call with Olivia, and dialed Evelyn Price. She was my former personal lawyer, a woman who retired from corporate battles 5 years ago, but remained sharper than anyone currently on my payroll. I explained the situation in tight, clipped sentences. Evelyn did not waste time with pleasantries or expressions of shock. "I am withdrawing every consent I have given for a sale, inspection, or demolition at this property," I told Grant, repeating Evelyn's instructions so everyone could hear. "Nobody touches the house or the boathouse. Evelyn is filing an emergency preservation motion now, and any further work will wait for a court order." "Mr. Mercer," Evelyn's voice crackled through the small speaker, sharp and commanding. "I need you to document everything in that house. Do not let Grant near that boathouse. I am filing an emergency preservation order with the county clerk right now." Grant did not argue. He offered a tight, patronizing nod, playing the role of the patient son, indulging a father's temporary delusion. But as he turned to walk out to the front porch with the deputy, I saw his thumbs moving rapidly across his phone screen. He was sending a text message. The moment the heavy front door clicked shut, Nathan slumped against the wall. The adrenaline left his body, leaving him hollowed out and exhausted. He slid down until he was sitting on the floor, rubbing his temples with trembling hands. I pulled a wooden chair from the dining table and sat across from him. The silence between us felt heavier than the ocean air outside. "Tell me exactly what happened 7 years ago." "I do not remember the water," Nathan said softly, staring at the floorboards. "I remember the freezing cold, and then a fisherman pulling me onto a wooden deck. The paramedics took me to St. Anne's County Hospital. The doctors told me I had a severe traumatic brain injury. I could not form words. The hospital followed protocol. They filed a John Doe report with the county sheriff." He paused, taking a slow, shaky breath. Weeks passed. The mental fog started to clear. I remembered the name of our company. A hospital social worker called the main office. "You were in a board meeting that afternoon, so the call went to the executive floor," Grant answered. My chest tightened, a sharp pain radiating outward. I remembered that specific day. We were negotiating the harbor expansion project. I had explicitly instructed my assistant to hold all calls so I would not be disturbed. "Grant came to the hospital," Nathan continued, his voice growing rougher. "He did not bring you. He did not bring Mom. He brought that embezzlement report you are holding. He brought a letter claiming you had completely disowned me. He told me the police were waiting outside the room to arrest me for corporate fraud if I tried to come home. The cruelty of it made me physically nauseous. I tasted copper in the back of my mouth. And the hospital just let him take you away?" "No," Nathan said, looking up at me, his eyes bloodshot. "The hospital administration was preparing to contact you directly. But Grant found a discharge coordinator. He paid someone cash to alter my emergency contact information in the system. Once I was medically cleared, they arranged a private transfer to Harbor View Residential Home. It is a terrible board and care facility, 50 miles inland. They admitted me under the fake name Evan Cole. The staff there did not care about my past. They just cared that the monthly checks cleared the bank. I leaned forward, my elbows resting heavily on my knees. Why did you not borrow a phone? Why did you not just call me directly once you could finally speak? Nathan looked back down at his hands. His voice broke, the sound fracturing into a sob. Because of the brain injury. Because of the terrible letter he showed me. I thought I had called you. I thought you were the one who told him to lock me away. My phone rang again, shattering the fragile quiet. It was Evelyn. Daniel, she said, her tone entirely stripped of its usual calm professionalism. I just tried to pull the cloud backup from your gate camera. The footage from the last 3 hours is gone. Someone wiped it remotely, using the Mercer Coastal Transit administrator account. I stood up and walked to the window. Grant was leaning against the hood of his expensive car, talking on his phone. Grant will claim it is just routine security maintenance, I said. It gets worse, Evelyn continued. I just got off the phone with your private banker. 10 minutes ago, Olivia requested a certified copy of your old durable power of attorney. They were moving incredibly fast. Olivia was laying the legal groundwork to take control of my finances, while Grant erased the digital footprint of his unannounced arrival at the beach house. Stop her, I ordered. Revoke the power of attorney immediately. I already filed the revocation, Evelyn said. Nathan just signed a medical authorization through the secure link I sent him. St. Anne's Records Office has confirmed that the original John Doe chart and discharge documents still exist. I also obtained an emergency preservation request for the related sheriff's file. She paused, while another document arrived in my inbox. Harborview's counsel has released a preliminary copy of its visitor log under Nathan's signed authorization. The certified originals will come directly from the record's custodians. Do not forward or alter anything I send you. I opened the first attachment. It was a certified copy of the county sheriff's original John Doe incident report. A grainy black and white photograph showed Nathan lying unconscious in a hospital bed 7 years earlier, his face bruised and swollen. The second attachment was a records custodian copy of the Harborview visitor log, dated 3 weeks after the storm. I enlarged the signature line. The handwriting was unmistakable. Grant Mercer. Beside his name, a checkmark appeared in the box marked Brother. I lowered the phone and looked through the window. Grant stood beside his car, smiling at me as if he were the devoted son protecting an unstable father. He did not know Nathan had authorized the release of the records. He did not know the hospital, the sheriff's office, and Harborview were now preserving their original files independently. And he did not know his own signature had connected him to the brother he claimed never to have seen again. I let the heavy linen curtain fall back into place against the window frame. Grant stood outside on the oyster shell driveway, confident in his victory, entirely oblivious to the visitor log currently glowing on my phone screen. I walked back toward the center of the kitchen. My younger son remained on the floor, his knees pulled tight against his chest, watching my every movement with exhausted, bloodshot eyes. Show me the letter, I commanded, and my voice sounded remarkably steady, despite the chaotic hammering in my chest. Nathan reached into the back pocket of his faded denim jeans. His fingers trembled slightly as he retrieved a piece of paper, completely worn white at the creases from years of unfolding and refolding. He handed the document up to me. The paper felt brittle, carrying the faint, stale scent of a locked drawer. The heavy stock stationery bore the official Mercer Coastal Transit corporate letterhead. The date stamped across the top margin matched the exact week after the massive storm that supposedly took his life. I read the opening lines, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. The text stated that he had betrayed our family, that he was no longer my son, and that if he ever attempted to return to the city, I would personally ensure the authorities prosecuted him to the fullest extent of the law. The signature at the bottom was mine. It looked flawless. The looping first letter and the sharp, aggressive strike through the surname matched my handwriting perfectly, but the words themselves felt like a physical blow to my ribs. I did not write this, I said, gripping the edges of the paper so hard the corners crinkled. Read the last paragraph, Nathan replied, resting his forehead against his knees. I scanned the remaining typed lines. You always cared more about being right than being loyal to the people who built you. My breath caught in my throat. That specific sentence came from a vicious, private argument we had in my office, just 2 days before he disappeared into the storm. Nobody else was in the room when I shouted those exact words at him. My phone vibrated on the granite island, cutting through the suffocating silence. Evelyn had sent a second encrypted email. I pulled the old embezzlement file from the corporate archives, the retired attorney stated, her voice tight and metallic over the speakerphone. You need to look at page 14. Daniel. I opened the attachment and scrolled past the preliminary audit notes. The glaring blue corporate logo stared back at me. The document authorized the transfer of $200,000 from the corporate safety fund directly into a personal offshore account bearing Nathan's name. At the bottom of the authorization page, resting right above the corporate legal disclaimer, sat my electronic signature. My stomach twisted into a cold, heavy knot. I forced myself to remember that specific financial quarter. We were preparing for a massive state safety audit. I had been working 80 hours a week, utterly buried under mountains of compliance paperwork. Olivia handled the final compliance packages that month, I said aloud, piecing the shattered memory together. She brought massive stacks of folders into my office. Nathan finally lifted his head. His dark eyes locked onto mine, stripping away decades of corporate authority. How many times did you sign something just because Olivia told you it was a routine procedure? The question echoed against the wooden cabinets. I had no answer. The man who prided himself on analyzing every minor contract had blindly trusted his daughter to finalize the daily administrative tasks. My sheer negligence had handed them the weapon they needed. I needed to move. Standing still in that kitchen felt like drowning in open water. I walked over to the corkboard hanging above the telephone and stared at Claire's wall calendar. A faint trace of her lavender perfume still lingered in this corner of the room. The 4 different colored markers formed a rigid, deliberate pattern across the glossy paper. Blue ink covered the days scheduled for property maintenance. Red ink highlighted medical appointments. Green ink circled meetings with local attorneys. But the bold black marker commanded my attention. Over the final 11 months of her life, Claire had marked a single black letter N across 20 different dates. I traced the dry ink with my index finger. The woman I married did not retreat to this isolated beach house to escape me or to manage a secret second life. My wife spent her final year conducting a solitary, agonizing investigation into our own children. She had carefully gathered the broken pieces. I had been too blind and too arrogant to look for. The screen of my phone lit up again. Olivia was calling back. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow down to a manageable rhythm, and accepted the call. "Dad, are you still there?" she asked. Her voice sounded breathless, painted with frantic concern that mirrored her mother perfectly. I did not mention the Harbor View visitor log. I kept my tone perfectly level, matching the measured cadence I always used in hostile board meetings. "I am still at the property. Evelyn just informed me you tried to pull a certified copy of my durable power of attorney." "Why would you do that, Olivia?" "To protect you," my daughter answered without missing a single beat. "Grant said there is a dangerous imposter trying to claim Nathan's identity down there. You are incredibly vulnerable right now. I just wanted to make sure nobody could exploit your grief and drain your personal accounts." She paused, letting the heavy silence stretch for 3 full seconds. The sound of seagulls crying outside bled through the window glass. "Besides, you signed all the final termination reports regarding Nathan 7 years ago," Olivia continued softly. "You knew he stole the money. We went through those documents together." My jaw tightened until my teeth ached. She was testing the waters. The chief financial officer wanted to see exactly how much her father remembered about those late nights in the executive suite. She was quietly reminding me that my name was already permanently tied to the false history. "I remember everything we did," I said smoothly, and ended the call before she could reply. 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. Evelyn was back on the line. The mechanical hum of the refrigerator provided a low, steady drone in the background. I forwarded the fake letter and the embezzlement authorization to a digital forensics expert in the city, the lawyer explained. The connection cracked slightly, betraying her urgency. "We have the preliminary results. The signature on that terrible letter is an image file. It was never signed with a physical pen. Someone lifted a high-resolution scan of your signature from a different internal contract and dropped it directly onto the document." I closed my eyes. The pieces snapped together with horrifying mechanical precision. The expert pulled the hidden metadata from the original draft. Evelyn continued, her words rushing out. The file originated from a terminal in the finance department. Specifically, it came from an old account managed directly by Olivia. Grant had provided the physical violence and the ruthless intimidation at the hospital, but Olivia had built the cage. My quiet, organized daughter had collected my angry words, stolen my signature, and engineered a legal reality that kept her brother buried alive for 7 years. "We need the original hard drive to prove chain of custody in a courtroom," Evelyn warned. "Without the physical drive, the metadata is just a theory that corporate lawyers will tear apart." I terminated the call and turned slowly back to Nathan. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long, bruised shadows across the floorboards. He had finally pushed himself off the floor and was sitting in the wooden dining chair, watching me with a guarded, utterly exhausted expression. "I did not write the letter," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, raspy whisper. "Olivia forged the entire document. She used a digital image of my signature to authorize the financial transfers." Nathan did not look relieved. He simply nodded, staring down at the scarred wooden table. "But they used my words," I admitted, the guilt finally breaking through my ribs like a physical weight. "I publicly called you a thief in front of the board of directors before the independent audit even finished." I was furious about the scandal, and I let my immense pride blind me to the truth. Grant and Olivia did not need to invent a cruel father. They just harvested the anger I already gave them. "You built the company," Nathan replied quietly, offering no forgiveness. "They just used your own blueprint to protect it." Before I could formulate a response, my phone rang a fourth time. Evelyn's number flashed brightly across the screen. "Daniel, you need to leave the beach house right now," she said, speaking faster than I had ever heard her speak in 20 years of legal practice. "Olivia just filed an emergency petition in county court. She is requesting an immediate cognitive assessment to evaluate your mental competency." My hands turned ice cold. "On what legal grounds?" "She claims you are suffering from severe, grief-induced delusions," Evelyn explained. "She filed a formal request to freeze all your assets and strip your corporate voting rights until a court-appointed doctor clears you. A judge will not grant that extreme request based on her word alone," I said, pacing back toward the kitchen window. "She did not just use her word," Evelyn said. "She attached a piece of digital evidence, an audio file. The lawyer sent the file directly to my messages." I opened the application and pressed the play icon. The audio quality was extremely poor, filled with background static and the sound of rustling fabric. But the voice was unmistakable. It was Claire. My wife was speaking to someone in a hushed, terrified whisper. "Daniel cannot know about Nathan yet," Claire said on the recording. The clip ended abruptly, leaving a void of silence. The kitchen grew entirely still. I stared at the dark screen of the phone resting in my palm. My own daughter was weaponizing my dead wife's voice to take complete control of my life and my company. But the most devastating part was not the legal maneuver. The crushing weight settling on my chest was the sudden, horrifying realization that Claire had truly believed I was too dangerous to trust with the truth. The sterile fluorescent lights of the independent testing laboratory hummed with a quiet, persistent vibration. Evelyn arranged the facility hours after Olivia filed her petition, demanding an irrefutable biological baseline before entering any courtroom. We could not rely on my recognition alone. The legal system demanded science. Nathan sat across from me at the stainless steel table. He stared at the blank white wall, his jaw tight, his hands folded defensively in his lap. A technician in blue scrubs unsealed 2 plastic testing kits, placing them deliberately on the metal surface. The sound of the plastic tearing echoed off the bare walls. "Open your mouth, please," the technician instructed, holding up a long cotton swab. My son complied, his eyes never leaving the blank wall. The swab brushed against his inner cheek, collecting the cells needed to prove he existed. Earning his legal identity back required treating him like a piece of questionable evidence, a suspect in his own life. The indignity radiated from his rigid posture, tightening the thick scar on his neck. When my turn came, I leaned forward, letting the technician collect the sample from my mouth. Once the glass vials were sealed and signed by 2 independent witnesses, I reached out across the metal table, instinctively wanting to place my hand on his shoulder. Nathan shifted his weight instantly, sliding his chair back just enough to avoid the contact. The movement was subtle, yet it carried the weight of a slammed door. "We will have the expedited results in 48 hours, Evelyn stated, packing her leather briefcase with deliberate efficiency. Those 48 hours stretched into an agonizing marathon of waiting. The following morning, a court-appointed physician evaluated my mental state in a mahogany-paneled conference room downtown. Olivia sat in the corner of the room, clutching a leather-bound folder containing Claire's old medical records. My daughter wore a soft beige cardigan, her face perfectly arranged into a mask of devastated concern. "My father forgot his quarterly cardiology appointment twice last month," Olivia told the doctor, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. "He has not slept since the funeral. Yesterday, he locked himself in the old beach house and started talking to empty rooms. He claims a dead man is living there. I just want him to get the help he needs before he hurts himself or ruins the family legacy." I kept my hands folded flat on the table, digging my fingernails into my palms. Showing anger would validate her narrative, painting me as a hostile, erratic old man. Showing impatience would look like neurological instability. I answered every single cognitive question clearly, listing our complex corporate asset valuations and reciting the exact timeline of recent family events without raising my voice a single decibel. The doctor clicked his pen, offering a neutral, practiced smile that gave nothing away. "Mr. Mercer demonstrates no immediate signs of cognitive decline or disorientation," the doctor finally said, closing his notepad. "However, given the extreme emotional stress of your recent bereavement and the gravity of these claims, I am recommending a temporary 14-day hold on any major asset liquidations or transfers." Olivia lowered her tissue. Her posture stiffened for a fraction of a second, a flash of pure calculation in her eyes, before the concerned daughter facade slipped back into place. She had failed to declare me incompetent and seize immediate control, but she had successfully bought herself a 2-week window. A ticking clock now hung over the entire estate. The DNA results arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered directly to Evelyn's secure server while we sat in her downtown office. The laboratory report definitively matched his current biological markers against his old medical files, confirming the dental records and the surgical serial numbers from the titanium screws in his shoulder. The biological probability of paternity read 99.9%. I sat in the leather guest chair, staring at the bright computer screen. A suffocating relief washed over me, heavy and exhausting. I reached into my pocket for my phone, ready to call the executive suite, bypass security, and demand Grant vacate the building immediately. Nathan leaned over the wooden desk and pressed his hand down over my device, forcing it flat against the mahogany surface. "DNA proves who I am," he said, his voice hard and flat, devoid of any victory. "It does not prove what they did to me on that dock. A biological match does not magically reverse a legal death certificate." "He is absolutely right, Daniel," Evelyn said, walking around the desk. The attorney dropped a massive black binder onto the glass coffee table. "Proving he is Nathan Mercer is only the first required step. You cannot just walk into the boardroom today and hand him his old executive chair. Grant and Olivia currently control his corporate voting rights through a fraudulent, court-approved estate structure." Evelyn unrolled a large printed flowchart across the glass surface, pinning the corners down with coffee mugs. "Before the storm hit 7 years ago, I held 40% of the company shares. Grant held 20, Nathan held 20, and Olivia controlled the final 20. My vote combined with Nathan always formed a secure 60% majority, keeping the others in check. After the probate court declared Nathan legally dead, someone submitted a final will and testament," Evelyn explained, pointing a silver pen at a specific red box highlighted on the chart. The document named Grant and Olivia as joint executors of his estate. It left a small, reasonable financial trust to Claire, which made the arrangement appear perfectly natural and loving to the probate judge. But the underlying clauses completely transferred his 20% voting block directly to his siblings, giving them an insurmountable 60% control over you. Nathan studied the intricate flowchart, his brow furrowed in deep, painful concentration as he navigated his fragmented memories. "I never drafted a will. I was 29 years old. I barely owned furniture, let alone a complicated estate plan. They forged the entire document," I said, the bitter reality tasting like ash in the back of my mouth. Yes, they did, Evelyn agreed, tapping her pen against the glass table. And I finally have the definitive proof regarding why Claire kept her private investigation hidden from you all these months. The attorney walked back to her computer and pressed a button on her keyboard. The full, unedited audio recording from Claire's final legal consultation filled the quiet room. This was the complete, context-rich file, not the maliciously manipulated fragment Olivia had submitted to the competency court. Daniel cannot know about Nathan yet. My wife's voice echoed through the high-quality speakers, frail and exhausted, but filled with terrifying clarity. Grant possesses financial documents bearing Daniel's exact signature. Until I know for certain whether Daniel signed those fraudulent transfers knowingly, Nathan will not feel safe returning to live under his roof. The recording stopped, leaving a heavy vacuum in the air. The silence felt absolute. The complete audio file entirely cleared me of Olivia's elder abuse suspicions, but it replaced that immediate legal threat with a far more devastating emotional truth. The woman I loved and shared a bed with for 40 years had spent her final days genuinely wondering if I had actively participated in our son's destruction. I will spend the rest of my life paying for that assumption, I murmured, staring blindly at the dark computer monitor, feeling older than I ever had. Evelyn cleared her throat, redirecting our attention back to the massive black binder. We have a concrete, undeniable way to break their control over the estate. The fake will contain multiple fatal errors. She opened a manila folder and presented a scanned copy of the forged document. The dense legal jargon filled 10 pages, culminating in a final signature page and a self-proving affidavit. A standard will might not necessarily require a notary stamp in this state to be valid, but a self-proving affidavit absolutely does, Evelyn explained, her tone shifting seamlessly into pure tactical litigation mode. Without a valid affidavit attached, Grant and Olivia would have needed to produce the physical witnesses in a courtroom to testify. To avoid that risky exposure, they manufactured a completely fraudulent notary seal. She placed a state database printout directly next to the forged will. The specific commission number on this stamp belonged to a notary whose state license was permanently revoked 6 months before the date printed on this document. They copied an old, invalid seal and illegally backdated the paperwork. Nathan leaned closer, tracing the scrawled witness signatures with his index finger. Who signed as the official witnesses? One is a former administrative assistant who worked exclusively under Olivia in the finance department, Evelyn answered, flipping to the next page of her investigation. The other signature traces back to a residential address across town. I ran the property records this morning. That house is owned by Harbor Strategic Consulting, a shell company currently paying its property taxes directly from a corporate account managed by Grant. The web of fraud was incredibly arrogant, built entirely on the safe assumption that nobody would ever look closely at the paperwork filed by a grieving, wealthy family. There is one more crucial detail, Evelyn added, pointing her silver pen to the second paragraph of the will. The specific font used in this section is a proprietary digital typeface. The software company that designed it did not release it to the public until a full year after Nathan disappeared into the ocean. The document is a mathematical and chronological impossibility. I felt a cold, sharp energy replace the suffocating guilt anchoring me to the chair. We possessed the notary fraud, the shell company connection, and the temporal impossibility of the digital font. It was enough evidence to freeze their control permanently. File the injunction immediately, I ordered, standing up. Strip their voting rights before they can react. Evelyn's phone chimed loudly on the desk. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the incoming message, and her professional expression hardened into a mask of pure alarm. We might be too late, the attorney said, turning the glowing screen toward us. Grant just called an emergency board of directors meeting for tomorrow morning. He is using his temporary executive authority to push through a massive corporate liquidation. He wanted to sell the Southern Marina assets and authorize a massive payout to cover what he called a historical safety debt. They knew the walls were finally closing in. The temporary freeze on my personal assets did not apply to corporate operations. Grant intended to drain the corporate accounts and move the cash offshore before a judge could even review the forged will. Evelyn scrolled down to the very bottom of the electronic meeting agenda. A single, ominous sentence sat under the final discussion item. Approval of emergency demolition contract for Seabrook Point property due to critical safety hazards. My blood ran entirely cold. They were not just trying to steal the remaining money. They were going to destroy the physical location where the violence actually occurred, wiping away any remaining trace of the crime scene before independent investigators could arrive with a warrant. Nathan stared at the glowing screen. His breathing grew shallow, ragged, and fast. "That is not a structural repair," he whispered, pressing his hands flat against the cold glass table. "That is where they left me." Evelyn's downtown office felt suddenly devoid of oxygen, the crisp air conditioning doing nothing to cool the sweat forming on the back of my neck. Nathan reached into his battered leather satchel and pulled out a manila folder, setting it down on the glass coffee table. The cardboard edge scraped against the surface, a harsh sound in the quiet room. My younger son slid a stack of incomplete, printed spreadsheets toward me. "This is the safety audit I was preparing 7 years ago," Nathan said, tracing a column of missing figures with his index finger. "The original file was on my laptop, which went missing during the storm, but I printed these pages the afternoon before I disappeared." I picked up the top sheet. The ink had faded slightly over the years, yet the accounting discrepancy stood out like a fresh bloodstain. Massive withdrawals had been routinely siphoned from the emergency safety fund. This was the specific account designated strictly for replacing the braking mechanisms and life-saving systems across our 3 largest passenger ferries. "They redirected the maintenance budget," Nathan explained, his voice low and raspy, thick with the effort of remembering. "The money flowed out to Harbor Strategic Consulting, the exact same shell company currently listed on the fraudulent witness affidavit." Evelyn leaned over my shoulder, her silver pen hovering over the transfer dates. "The consulting firm eventually funneled every stolen dollar straight into the private marina development project. Grant and Olivia were currently rushing to sell." My chest tightened. A heavy, suffocating weight settled right behind my ribs. The evidence of their theft had always been there, buried under layers of corporate bureaucracy and pristine financial reports. I had simply chosen not to look. Memory crashed into me, sharp and unforgiving. 7 years ago, just 2 days before the massive coastal storm hit the peninsula, Nathan had walked into my executive suite and asked for a private meeting. I remembered his tense posture, the nervous way he kept tapping his knuckles against his thigh. Before he could speak, Grant had interrupted us. My oldest son had smiled that calm, practiced smile and smoothly suggested Nathan was buckling under the extreme pressure of the audit. I had looked at the massive pile of pending contracts on my mahogany desk and postponed the meeting. The memory turned acidic in my throat. On the final night, when the rain started lashing against the office windows, I had sent Nathan a single text message. "Handle it with Grant," I had typed. "I am done with the drama." That single, impatient sentence had pushed my younger son directly to the isolated boathouse to face his brother alone. I had practically written his death warrant because I was too busy protecting our corporate reputation to protect my own blood. "We have enough to pause the board meeting," Evelyn stated, breaking the heavy silence and pulling me back to the present. The attorney walked back to her desk and picked up the phone. "I am filing the temporary injunction right now to freeze the voting rights associated with Nathan's estate." By noon, the county judge granted our emergency request. The corporate board could not legally approve any massive commercial sale or demolition contract without the explicit oversight of an independent receiver. Grant instantly lost his absolute control over the company, though he retained his title as chief executive officer for the time being. Retaliation came swiftly. Within an hour, my phone buzzed with an alert from a major financial news network. Olivia had drafted a highly polished press release on behalf of the company. The public statement declared that an unstable imposter was attempting to destabilize Mercer Coastal Transit, and the family was taking appropriate legal action to protect their grieving father. The media spin was vicious, painting me as a vulnerable old man manipulated by a grifter, but the sudden national exposure triggered an unexpected consequence. Late that afternoon, as Nathan and I sat in the silent kitchen of the Seabrook Point beach house, an unrecognized number called my private line. "Mr. Mercer," a gravelly voice said through the speaker. "My name is Malcolm Reed. I was the senior structural engineer for your ferry division before I retired." I remembered Malcolm. a quiet, diligent man who always wore oil-stained coveralls and never missed a shift in 30 years of service. I saw the news on television, Malcolm continued, lowering his voice as if someone might be listening outside his window. 7 years ago, Nathan came to me. He asked me to secretly back up the maintenance logs because he suspected someone was altering the electronic data. I still have the old hard drive. My hand gripped the edge of the granite kitchen counter. Why did you never come forward with this information? Grant forced everyone in my department to sign aggressive non-disclosure agreements immediately after the storm, the old engineer confessed, his voice trembling slightly. I was terrified of losing my pension, but seeing them drag Nathan through the mud again, I cannot stay quiet. I promised Malcolm absolute legal protection and full financial backing. Acknowledging that drive meant I was formally accepting the total exposure of our corporate failures, but saving the company name no longer mattered to me. I needed the absolute truth. The sun began to set, casting long, dark shadows across the salt-stained windows of the kitchen. A familiar, heavy engine rumbled down the dirt driveway. I watched through the glass as Grant stepped out of his sleek black sedan. He had driven down to the beach house completely alone, without his sister or his usual security detail. I stepped out onto the wooden porch before he could reach the front door. The ocean wind whipped around us, cold and biting, carrying the smell of impending rain. "Dad," Grant said, stopping at the bottom of the wooden stairs. He kept his hands visible, playing the role of a reasonable, exhausted negotiator. "This public fight is going to destroy everything you built." Nathan suffered a terrible brain injury. Mom was confused and manipulated at the end of her life. "We can still fix this." I stared down at the man who shared my last name, studying the perfect crease in his trousers and the expensive watch on his wrist. "You forged a will and stole his voting rights." Grant did not flinch. His expression remained entirely placid. "I protected our legacy. I am willing to pay for his continued medical treatment. I will buy him a quiet, comfortable house, far away from the city. We can keep this entire situation private and move forward." "You are trying to bribe your way out of a federal crime," I replied, my voice steady, despite the absolute disgust churning in my stomach. The polite facade finally cracked. Grant took a step forward, resting his hand heavily on the wooden banister. "If this company falls, every single employee falls right along with it. The mechanics, the deckhands, the administrative staff. Nathan always cared more about proving he was right than he ever cared about the real people, depending on us to sign their paychecks." The words hit their mark with devastating precision. A cold knot formed in my gut. He was weaponizing the exact fear that kept me awake for 20 years. The livelihood of 300 families rested directly on our corporate stability. Grant knew my absolute weakest point, and he was pressing his thumb directly into the bruise. Behind me, the screen door groaned on its rusty hinges. Nathan stepped out onto the porch, carrying his canvas duffel bag. His face was pale, his jaw locked tight beneath the scar tissue. My younger son had listened through the open window, and the defensive posture of his shoulders told me he believed I was actually considering the quiet settlement. He was preparing to walk away again rather than watch me choose the company over his life. I turned and planted my hand firmly against Nathan's chest, stopping him from descending the stairs. I did not offer any emotional reassurance or soft apologies. I simply looked back down at the chief executive officer standing in the dirt. "Get off my property," I told Grant, letting the cold command echo across the empty yard. Any future communication or financial offer must go directly through Evelyn Price. Grant looked at the hand I had placed on his brother's chest. His jaw flexed. The final realization that he could no longer manipulate my guilt settled over his sharp features. He stepped back from the stairs, his dark eyes shifting from my face toward the old wooden boathouse, sitting quietly near the water. "You have absolutely no idea what a sudden storm can erase," Grant said softly. The quiet, measured tone of his voice was far more terrifying than any loud outburst. He turned his back, climbed into his luxury sedan, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. The threat hung in the damp air long after the red taillights faded into the coastal fog. I finally lowered my hand, and Nathan dropped his bag onto the porch boards. We did not need to speak about what had just happened. The battle lines were permanently drawn in the sand. 3 hours later, past midnight, the phone resting on the kitchen island rang. The shrill sound pierced the quiet house. I answered it immediately. "Mr. Mercer," Malcolm Reed gasped. The old engineer sounded completely out of breath, accompanied by the wailing sound of police sirens in the background. "Someone just broke into my storage unit." My heart hammered fiercely against my ribs. "Are you safe? Did they hurt you?" "I am fine. I was not there," Malcolm replied, coughing slightly to catch his breath. "But they ransacked the place. They did not touch the expensive power tools or the electronics. The police said the intruders only took one specific item, a plastic bin labeled Boathouse Camera Archive." I closed my eyes, picturing Grant smiling in the dark as his hired contractors destroyed what he thought was the final piece of evidence. "They took the decoy box," Malcolm continued, a faint trace of grim satisfaction entering his exhausted voice. "I kept the real hard drive hidden inside an old coffee can in my garage, a place Grant Mercer would never think to look." The low, guttural roar of a diesel engine shattered the pre-dawn quiet, rattling the glass in the kitchen windows. Yellow headlights slashed through the dense coastal fog, illuminating the oyster shell driveway. I pushed my chair back from the kitchen island, leaving my coffee untouched, and strode out the front door. The damp morning air immediately soaked through my sweater. A heavy flatbed truck and a massive hydraulic excavator idled directly in front of the rusted iron gate. A man wearing a neon safety vest climbed down from the truck cabin, carrying a metal clipboard. He did not look like a corporate executive. He looked like a man paid to do a job quickly and quietly before sunrise. "We have an emergency demolition order," the foreman announced, shining a heavy flashlight onto the paperwork. "Authorized by Harbor Marine Subcontracting to remove a structurally compromised boathouse. The permit says the structure poses an immediate environmental hazard." Harbor Marine Subcontracting was a small, obscure subsidiary of Mercer Coastal Transit. Grant had buried the paperwork under layers of corporate bureaucracy, completely isolating his own name from the demolition order. He lacked the courage to show up himself, sending hourly laborers to erase his brother's crime scene instead. "This property is under an active legal dispute," I informed the foreman, keeping my voice dangerously low. "Turn those engines off." Before the man could respond, the excavator operator engaged the hydraulic gears. The metal treads ground against the asphalt, emitting a high-pitched mechanical shriek. Behind me, the screen door slammed open. Nathan stumbled out onto the porch, his hands pressed hard over his ears. The sound of tearing metal completely unraveled him, pulling his fractured mind right back into the violent storm 7 years ago. He dropped to his knees on the wooden boards, struggling to pull air into his lungs. Rage, pure and blinding, ignited in my chest. I did not yell. I simply walked forward, opened the rusted gate, and stepped directly into the path of the massive yellow machine. I planted my boots on the cracked pavement, folded my arms, and stared up at the operator. I was daring him to move the metal bucket 1 inch closer to my son. The operator hesitated, clearly unwilling to crush an elderly man in a designer coat, and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise. I pulled my phone from my pocket, dialed the county sheriff, and then called Evelyn Price. 90 minutes later, a county patrol vehicle blocked the access road. The sheriff officially halted the demolition until the civil court could verify the emergency permit. Evelyn arrived shortly after, accompanied by a private forensic investigator she had kept on retainer overnight. The investigator, a quiet man named Thomas, handed out blue surgical booties and latex gloves. We walked across the damp grass toward the dilapidated boathouse. The wooden structure sagged heavily toward the dark water of the inlet, smelling of rotting cedar and stagnant salt. Nathan refused to cross the threshold. He stood frozen outside the doorframe, his knuckles white as he gripped the door jamb, serving as our reluctant navigator. "We are not tearing down walls or digging up floorboards," Evelyn instructed Thomas, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "We document, we photograph, and we preserve." Thomas unpacked a handheld density scanner and began sweeping the interior walls. The device emitted a steady, low hum. Nathan watched the sweeping motion, his eyes tracking across the back corner of the room. "Stop," Nathan whispered, pointing toward a section of paneling near the old workbench. "That wood is different." I looked closely at the spot. The cedar planks matched the surrounding wall perfectly in color, but the grain pattern shifted abruptly. The nails securing those specific boards lacked the thick crust of rust, covering every other nail in the damp building. Thomas ran the scanner over the newer wood. The device shrieked, indicating a dense cluster of objects hidden inside the hollow cavity. Using a small pry bar, the investigator carefully popped the top plank loose. A heavy plastic bag dropped out of the wall, hitting the floorboards with a dull thud. Thomas photographed the bag before slicing it open with a sterile blade. Inside sat a black leather wallet, a heavy ring of car keys, and a waterlogged smartphone. My stomach dropped. I clearly remembered standing in my corporate office 7 years ago, while Grant assured the local police that Nathan had fled by boat. My oldest son had explicitly claimed Nathan took his wallet and identification to start a new life. A man desperately fleeing into the ocean does not seal his driver's license and car keys behind a freshly nailed wall. We needed to look closer. Thomas continued processing the small room, aiming his camera at the dusty corners. Nathan's gaze drifted toward the ceiling rafters, locking onto a faded orange shape hanging from a rusty hook. "That is my safety vest," Nathan murmured, his breathing accelerating again. "The one with my name in black marker. Grant told you I took it, but I never put it on." I retrieved the life jacket from the rafters. The heavy canvas felt stiff with dried salt. As I turned it over in my hands, a subtle detail caught my eye. The bottom hem had been sliced open and carefully sewn shut again. The original manufacturing thread was a faded white, but this specific repair utilized a thick, dark blue nylon thread. Claire always kept blue nylon thread in her sewing kit to repair the heavy canvas boat covers. "Cut it open," I told the investigator, handing the vest over. Thomas set up a small video camera on a tripod to record the extraction. He sliced the blue thread with surgical precision, parting the thick canvas fabric. Tucked deep inside the buoyant foam padding sat a tiny, waterproof plastic case. Inside the case was a micro-secure digital memory card. Claire had not simply found the jacket and kept it for sentimental reasons. My wife had discovered the hidden data, stitched it securely into the vest, and explicitly instructed me to open the rusty gate myself so I would eventually find it. Thomas inserted the tiny card into his rugged laptop. The screen flickered, struggling to read the corrupted files, before rendering a grainy, black and white video feed. The timestamp in the corner matched the exact night of the massive storm 7 years ago. The silent footage showed the interior of the boathouse. Nathan stood near the workbench, yelling something at the camera's direction. A second later, Grant strode into the frame. He was holding a heavy steel locking bar, the kind used to secure commercial shipping containers. Then, a third figure stepped into the edge of the frame. Olivia. My daughter walked directly toward the security camera mounted on the wall. She reached up, entering a numerical override code into the keypad without a moment of hesitation. The video feed instantly froze, catching a final, horrifying still frame of Grant swinging the heavy steel bar toward his brother's head. The sharp metallic clatter of the steel bar hitting the wooden floor in the video echoed from the laptop speakers. That specific sound acted like a key turning a rusted lock in Nathan's damaged brain. He gasped, dropping to his knees on the damp boathouse floor, clutching his skull. "He told me to sign the audit confession," Nathan choked out, the fragmented memories finally stitching themselves together in real time. I refused. I turned to walk away, and he hit me. My younger son looked up, his face pale and slick with cold sweat. Olivia was standing right by the door. I remember what she said right before the camera went dark. She told Grant that if I could not vote at the next board meeting, Dad would have absolutely no choice but to follow their lead. The sheer calculation of her statement chilled my blood. Olivia did not panic. She saw her brother being beaten and immediately calculated the corporate voting margins. "I still do not remember who opened the floodgate," Nathan whispered, staring at the dark water churning below the wooden deck. "I do not know how the water got in, or how I washed out into the current." Thomas knelt near the spot where the video showed the impact. He sprayed a chemical reagent across the wide gaps between the old cedar floorboards. The liquid instantly foamed, glowing a bright, fluorescent blue under his specialized ultraviolet flashlight. "Massive blood presence," the investigator confirmed softly. "Scrubbed with industrial bleach, but it seeped deep into the wood grain." We had the physical proof, the unassailable link between the financial motive, the physical attack, and the deliberate cover-up. We packed the evidence carefully, maintaining a strict chain of custody, and walked back up the grassy slope toward the main house. The relief of securing the evidence vanished the moment I stepped onto the front porch. The glass pane on the kitchen window was shattered. Shards of glass littered the wooden floorboards inside. I pushed the front door open, stepping carefully over the debris. The interior had not been ransacked. The intruder knew exactly what they were looking for. The heavy plastic bag Thomas had pulled from the boathouse wall was missing. The thief had stolen Nathan's waterlogged, broken smartphone, leaving the wallet and keys behind. Evelyn rushed to her laptop, pulling up the feed from the temporary wireless cameras she had installed around the perimeter the previous afternoon. She rewound the footage to the exact moment we were down inside the boathouse. The video displayed a figure wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt and a surgical mask approaching the kitchen door. The intruder did not smash the window immediately. First, they tried the electronic keypad on the deadbolt. The masked figure quickly punched in a 4-digit combination. The lock flashed red, denying entry, forcing the thief to break the glass instead. Nathan stared at the screen, his dark eyes locked onto the specific movement of the intruder's fingers on the keypad. They tried 0, 8, 1, 4, Nathan said, reading the keystrokes with absolute certainty. I recognized those 4 numbers instantly. Only the members of our immediate family knew that specific sequence. Nathan looked away from the monitor and met my gaze, the final pieces of the betrayal locking into place. That was Olivia's birthday. The shattered glass crunched beneath my shoes as I stepped away from the kitchen window. Malcolm Reed's backed-up hard drive sat safely locked inside Evelyn's leather briefcase, but the decoy smartphone had vanished into the night, carried away by someone who knew the private keypad combination to our back door. Evelyn closed her laptop with a sharp click. The screen went dark, reflecting the cold, tired lines of my face. Olivia is no longer just managing the paperwork, the attorney said, her voice dropping to a low, deliberate register. She engineered the physical cover-up from the very beginning. She watched her brother get beaten, secured the surveillance override, and designed the financial architecture to bury him permanently. My hands curled into tight fists inside my pockets. For years, I had viewed Olivia as the peacemaker of the family, the quiet daughter who balanced the books and kept our home running smoothly, while Grant and I chased corporate dominance. The realization that she was the cold intellect behind the entire conspiracy felt like a physical blow to my chest. We packed our things and returned to the city that afternoon. We could no longer stay at the beach house unprotected. Evelyn immediately deployed her digital forensic experts to analyze Malcolm Reed's rescued hard drive. The machine hummed quietly in a secure conference room downtown as the data recovery technician extracted files that had been locked away for 7 years. Nathan stood behind the technician's shoulder, watching lines of code scroll across the monitor. "Here it is," the technician said, stopping the scroll. The internal maintenance logs and the unedited board minutes from the quarter. Nathan disappeared. I leaned over the desk. The documents laid bare the mechanics of the corporate theft. Before Nathan vanished, he had flagged a series of suspicious wire transfers, draining millions from the Emergency Safety Fund into Harbor Strategic Consulting. The original spreadsheets showed Nathan's electronic notes, demanding an immediate internal audit. The recovery software then pulled up the modified files created right after the storm. Olivia had accessed the secure database at midnight. The metadata proved she systematically deleted Nathan's warning notes, altered the ledger headings, and relabeled the stolen capital as emergency consulting fees. She had written a script to rewrite the history of our company line by line, ensuring the numbers always balanced, and my signature remained the anchor for every fraudulent transaction. Nathan stared at the screen, his fingers twitching slightly at his sides. "She didn't just want the money," he said, his voice hollow. "She wanted the structure. If I completed that audit, the board would have restructured the entire executive division. She and Grant would have lost their positions." Evelyn pulled up a separate window containing the digital drafts of the fake disownment letter we found earlier. "Look at the creation timestamps on these text files," the lawyer instructed, pointing to a series of saved documents. 3 distinct drafts appeared on the monitor. The first file used cold, calculated corporate language written from a financial perspective, focusing heavily on asset protection and legal liability. The second file softened the tone, attempting to mimic a disappointed parent. The final version incorporated the exact phrase I had shouted at Nathan during our private office argument 2 days before the storm. Olivia had harvested my genuine anger like raw material, shaping it into a weapon designed to sever the bond between father and son. She understood my flaws better than I did myself. The investigation then shifted to the hospital records from Street Anne's County and the subsequent transfer logs to Harbor View residential home. The paper trail dismantled any lingering illusions about Grant's solo brutality. The hospital administration had followed standard protocol by filing the initial John Doe report with the county sheriff after Nathan was pulled from the water. A hospital social worker had subsequently contacted Mercer Coastal Transit once Nathan remembered the corporate name. Grant had arrived at the facility first, armed with the fake letter and the manufactured embezzlement reports, but the medical records showed that Grant alone could not have executed the long-term placement. A secondary series of internal authorization forms bore a secondary signature, Olivia Mercer, acting as corporate proxy. She had personally approved the hush-hush transfer to Harborview, ensuring her brother remained locked away under the alias Evan Cole while she systematically dismantled his estate. Grant was the hammer, but Olivia was the architect who mapped out every blow. Later that evening, my private cell phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was Olivia. I accepted the call and placed it on speaker, so Evelyn and Nathan could hear every word. I kept my breathing steady, forcing all trace of outrage out of my voice. "Dad," Olivia said, her tone smooth, coated in an artificial sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Grant is losing his mind over these temporary injunctions. He thinks we can fix this by paying off the imposter, but you and I both know that's a mistake. We need to protect the family name. What do you suggest we do, Olivia?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Grant is emotional, and he's making reckless mistakes," she said, effortlessly throwing her older brother under the bus to save herself. "He went down to the beach house today, without telling me, and it's just causing more chaos. If you agree to meet me tomorrow morning in the executive suite, we can quietly restructure the voting blocks. I can handle the legal filings. We'll give you back absolute control, and we can put this entire nightmare behind us." She was offering a partial surrender, hoping to salvage her own position by sacrificing Grant. She still believed she could manage me, still believed I was the blind, trusting father who would sign any paper she placed in front of my face. "I'll be there," I said quietly. "Tomorrow morning at 9. Bring Nathan's paperwork so we can shred it," Olivia added, her voice dropping into a colder, transactional register. "We'll say it was all a clerical error from the start. Just like old times, Dad." The line clicked dead. Nathan looked at me across the desk, his eyes dark and burning. "She's trying to isolate Grant, cut a deal with you, and keep the shell company accounts intact. She still thinks she's won. She hasn't won anything," Evelyn stated, sliding a blank sheet of paper across the desk. "She just walked right into our trap." The lawyer outlined the final phase of our strategy. We would not arrest them quietly in the dark or ambush them outside their homes. We needed a public, undeniable reckoning that destroyed their control within the very halls they used to commit the fraud. Evelyn drafted formal notices for an extraordinary general meeting of the board of directors, scheduled for the following morning. Under the emergency powers granted by the independent receiver, we summoned every senior executive, the corporate legal counsel, and the representatives of our corporate insurance carriers. That night, I sat alone in my study, staring at the family portraits hanging on the wall. For decades, I believed that building a powerful corporate dynasty was the ultimate measure of a father's worth. I had praised Grant for his ruthless ambition and rewarded Olivia for her quiet efficiency, blind to the rot spreading beneath the polished surface. My pride had kept the gates locked against the truth for 7 long years. The next morning, the sun broke through the city smog, casting sharp beams of light across the glass towers of Mercer Coastal Transit. Nathan wore a clean, dark suit, his shoulders straight, carrying the hard-earned composure of a man who had clawed his way back from the grave. We stepped out of the private elevator onto the executive floor. The thick wool carpeting muffled our footsteps as we approached the heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom. Through the frosted glass, I could see shadows moving inside. Grant was pacing near the head of the long table, while Olivia sat calmly near the center, reviewing a tablet and adjusting the cuffs of her blouse. They were waiting to seal their victory, completely unaware that the documents inside the leather folder Nathan carried were loaded with charges they could never outrun. The heavy mahogany doors of the executive boardroom swung open with a soft, expensive hiss. Inside, the long conference table gleamed under recessed lighting, surrounded by empty leather chairs. An independent receiver sat near the center, flanked by representatives from our corporate insurance carriers and 2 county compliance officers. Grant was pacing near the windows, his tie slightly loosened, while Olivia sat composed at her designated seat, scrolling calmly through a tablet. "You're late, Daniel," Grant said, spinning around. He stopped dead in his tracks as Nathan stepped past me into the room. Color drained instantly from Grant's face. Olivia dropped her tablet, the device clattering sharply against the polished wood table before sliding to a halt. Neither of them spoke. The heavy silence in the room stretched so tight it felt like a wire pulled to the breaking point. "Sit down," I commanded, pulling out my own chair. My voice carried the absolute authority of a man who had built this empire from the ground up. Grant recovered first, slamming his palms flat onto the table. "What is the meaning of this? Why is this man here?" He pointed a shaking finger directly at his brother. "He is legally dead. This is an illegal intrusion by an imposter." "He is not an imposter," the independent receiver stated calmly, opening a thick leather binder. "We have verified his biological identity, his dental records, and the original police reports filed by St. Anne's County Hospital." Olivia's composure cracked entirely. She turned her head sharply toward Grant, her eyes wide with sudden panic. "You told me he was taken care of. You said it was handled." Grant's head snapped toward his sister. "I did what you asked me to do with the facility. Don't you dare try to pin this entire mess on me." The illusion of their unified front evaporated in seconds. Their immediate instinct was betrayal, turning on each other the moment real pressure applied. Evelyn stepped forward, placing a thick stack of verified documents onto the center of the table. "Under emergency corporate review, we are officially placing both Grant Mercer and Olivia Mercer on administrative leave, pending a full federal investigation into corporate fraud, forgery, and obstruction of justice." "This is absurd," Grant shouted, lunging forward, his face flushed dark crimson. "We hold 60% of the voting shares through the estate trust. You can't touch us." "Your estate trust is built on a fraudulent will," Evelyn replied evenly, sliding the state database printout across the wood. The self-proving affidavit attached to that document bears a forged notary seal from a commission revoked 6 months prior, and the digital font used in the text did not exist when Nathan vanished. Olivia slumped back into her leather chair, her fingers clawing helplessly at the fabric of her sleeve. Her calculated defenses were crumbling under the weight of hard, unyielding paperwork. I stood up slowly, leaning both hands against the polished table. I did not yell at them. I did not need to raise my voice. "For 7 years, you used my name to launder money, lock your brother away, and rewrite our family history. You thought you could bury the truth behind corporate red tape." I reached into my leather folder, pulled out the worn, salt-crusty orange life jacket, and dropped it right onto the center of the table, next to their pristine reports. The canvas sat there like an open wound, smelling faintly of ocean salt and decay. "A man fleeing by sea does not leave the only thing meant to keep him alive behind in a locked boathouse," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room like a razor. Grant stared at the life jacket, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. He looked like a man watching an avalanche roll down a mountain directly toward him. "You want to talk about who did what?" Grant snarled, his eyes bulging as he glared across the table at his sister. "Olivia was the one who designed the entire shell company network. She edited the board minutes. She told me to lock the boathouse door and turn off the security cameras." Olivia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Shut up, Grant. Just shut your mouth." "No, I won't shut up," Grant screamed, completely losing control of his polished executive facade. "She's the one who locked the floodgate when he was bleeding on the floor. She said the tide would finish what I started." The confession hung in the air, brutal and absolute. The insurance representatives exchanged grim glances, while the compliance officers immediately began recording the verbal exchange for the official record. "Is that your official statement, Mr. Mercer?" the independent receiver asked, leaning forward. Grant froze. The color rushed out of his face as he realized what he had just shouted in front of federal and county witnesses. He turned his head slowly toward Olivia, but she refused to meet his eyes. Her face had turned into a mask of pure, venomous hatred. She planned it all, Olivia whispered, her voice shaking with rage as she pointed a trembling finger at her older brother. He hit him with the steel bar. I just made sure we survived it. The mutual destruction was complete. They had torn their own conspiracy apart in less than 5 minutes, needing no outside force to break them down. The insurance representative cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. Based on the physical evidence, the financial records, and the recorded admissions during this proceeding, corporate coverage is immediately suspended for both individuals. Law enforcement has been notified. No officers stepped out of a hidden room. There was no arrest warrant yet, and Evelyn had warned me that a theatrical arrest before investigators completed their probable cause package would give Grant and Olivia another procedural weapon. The independent receiver closed the binder in front of him. Effective immediately, both of you are suspended from all corporate duties, he said. Your building credentials, access tokens, company vehicles, and authority over all accounts are revoked. The statements made in this meeting will be preserved and delivered with the supporting evidence to the appropriate investigators. Grant pushed back from the table. You cannot keep me here. No one is keeping you here, Evelyn replied. You are free to leave. You are not free to touch company property, transfer money, contact witnesses, or destroy records. Grant looked at Olivia. For the first time, neither seemed certain what the other would do. Olivia remained seated beside her attorney. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were already moving across the room, measuring exits and calculating what data might still be reachable. Grant tore his identification badge from his jacket and threw it onto the table. This company will collapse without me. He walked out before the receiver could finish reading the preservation notice. Security followed him to the elevator, but they had no legal authority to detain him. Olivia's attorney leaned close and whispered into her ear. She shut down her tablet and placed it on the table as instructed, then demanded time to review the evidence before answering further questions. The county investigators were on their way. For the moment, the boardroom reckoning ended not with handcuffs, but with the two people who had controlled everything suddenly stripped of the systems that protected them. Nathan remained at the far end of the table. He had not celebrated. He had not even looked at Grant and Olivia as they left. I walked toward him, stopping before I entered the space he had kept between us. I am sorry, I said. Nathan stared at the orange life jacket lying among the legal exhibits. Sorry is what people say after the danger is over. Before I could answer, Evelyn called my name from the doorway. A representative from the receiver's office held up a tablet. Grant's assigned corporate vehicle is still transmitting through the fleet account, he said. It just passed the Seabrook Point toll camera. I turned back toward Nathan's chair. It was empty. The side door stood open. On the leather seat rested the old brass key to the boathouse and a folded piece of paper. I opened it. I remembered who opened the floodgate. My blood went cold. Nathan had gone back alone. I called the county sheriff before I left the room. Evelyn gave the dispatcher the preservation order, the property coordinates, and the details of Grant's vehicle. The sheriff sent a patrol unit from the coastal station and notified the Marine Division to approach from the inlet. I did not tell them I would wait safely in the city. I told them I was driving behind their unit and would provide information about the boathouse system when we arrived. Rain began falling before we reached Seabrook Point. The patrol vehicle turned onto the access road ahead of me, its lights dark to avoid warning anyone inside. A second deputy met us near the gate. Through the receiver's fleet access, Evelyn confirmed that Grant's vehicle had stopped beside the boathouse 20 minutes earlier. The chain on the rusty gate had been cut. One deputy ordered me to remain behind the main house while they cleared the property. Then a shout carried through the rain. Nathan. I heard his voice from inside the boathouse. He opened it because she told him to. The deputies moved down the slope with their weapons holstered but ready. I followed only as far as the exterior emergency control mounted beside the upper walkway. Inside, Grant stood near the tidal mechanism with a crowbar in his hands. Several floorboards had already been pulled loose. Nathan faced him from the opposite side of the room, trapped between the workbench and the open channel. Grant looked nothing like the controlled executive from the boardroom. Mud covered his trousers. Blood ran from a cut across one hand. I came for the phone, he said. Give it to me, and I will tell them Olivia planned everything. There is nothing on the phone, Nathan replied. Mom left it here because she knew the person who feared it would come back. Grant's eyes shifted toward the temporary forensic camera mounted above the door. He finally understood. The old phone had been bait. His return was the evidence. A deputy stepped into the doorway. Grant Mercer, put down the crowbar and move away from the flood controls. Grant tightened his grip. This is private property. You are suspended from the company. The site is under a preservation order, and you were recorded forcing entry, the deputy said. Put it down. Nathan stared at the iron lever beside Grant. His breathing changed. I remember, he whispered. Grant looked at him. Nathan's face tightened as the final pieces returned. Olivia opened the floodgate after you hit me. I heard her say the tide would finish what you started. Grant's expression twisted. She was the one who wanted you gone, he said. I only wanted you to sign the confession. The deputy's body camera captured every word. Grant suddenly drove the crowbar beneath the release lever. The old mechanism shifted. A deep metallic groan rolled beneath the floor. Water surged into the lower channel. Grant was not trying to kill Nathan again. He was trying to flood the remaining blood-bearing timbers and force everyone out before investigators could remove them. The deputy advanced. Grant swung the crowbar across the narrow walkway, forcing him back. Nathan moved toward the side exit, but the rising water cut off the lowest steps. I knew the system. My father and I had installed the emergency bypass decades earlier. The main lever inside controlled the floodgate, but a manual cutoff wheel sat outside the upper wall. I gripped the rusted wheel with both hands. It did not move. Turn it clockwise, then lift the locking pin, Nathan shouted from inside. That was how he had escaped 7 years ago. He had broken the lower screen after Olivia opened the gate and let the current carry him through the drainage channel. I pulled the corroded pin upward. The wheel turned. The secondary barrier dropped into place with a heavy impact, slowing the water before it reached the upper floor. Grant stared toward the sound. The distraction lasted 1 second. It was enough. The deputy crossed the walkway, seized Grant's crowbar arm, and forced him against the wall. The second officer entered from the side door and secured his other wrist. The crowbar struck the floor. Grant continued shouting even after the handcuffs closed. Olivia designed it. She forged the letter. She told me where to put him. The deputy read him his rights, while the body camera recorded his attempt to trade his sister's guilt for his own freedom. Nathan stood against the far wall, soaked to the knees. I started toward him, but stopped. He looked at the flooded doorway between us. I extended my hand. Nathan studied it for several seconds before gripping my wrist and allowing me to help him across the final step. Outside, the Marine unit secured the lower channel, while forensic officers photographed the disturbed boards and flood mechanism. Grant was placed in the rear of the patrol vehicle, wet, shaking, and finally unable to command anyone around him. My phone rang. It was Evelyn. City investigators intercepted Olivia, attempting to move funds from Harbor Strategic Consulting and delete the mirrored cloud archive, she said. The preservation order captured the access logs. They have seized her devices, the original false will, and the company's seal from her office safe. She is being taken into custody now. I looked toward the patrol vehicle. Grant sat behind the reinforced glass, staring at Nathan with the same hatred he had carried for 7 years. But Nathan was no longer looking at him. He was looking at me. 7 years ago, you told me to handle it with Grant, he said. I know. This time, you came. There was no forgiveness in the words. Not yet, but there was space, where a locked gate had once stood. I nodded toward the house. Let's go home. Months passed before the federal magistrates and corporate bankruptcy courts finished untangling the ruined framework of Mercer Coastal Transit. The legal proceedings moved at a grueling, meticulous pace, stripping away every single asset Grant and Olivia had acquired through fraud, intimidation, and violence. Federal prosecutors offered Olivia a plea deal in exchange for unlocking her encrypted personal servers and detailing every layer of the offshore shell companies. The cooperation reduced her prison sentence slightly, but it did not save her from a substantial federal penitentiary term. Her certified public accountant credentials were permanently revoked. Her name was completely excised from the charitable foundation board, and the damning phrase, "dead vote," discovered in her private files, became a permanent part of the public court record destroying her carefully crafted mask of a devoted family protector once and for all. Grant fought the charges until the bitter end, refusing to accept any accountability. During his trial, the unedited video footage from the boathouse camera, combined with his own verbal admissions during the executive board meeting, dismantled every single defense his high-priced attorneys attempted to construct. He received a multi-year federal prison sentence for violent assault, financial fraud, perjury, and willful obstruction of justice. The pristine corporate portrait of Grant Mercer was promptly unhooked from the central lobby wall of our downtown office building. In its place, the Independent Board Compliance Committee installed a bronze plaque bearing the names of every whistleblowing employee who had tried to warn management years ago. Nathan's legal status as a living person was officially restored by the county probate judge, voiding the fraudulent death certificate and the manufactured will in a single ruling. The corporate board formally purged all internal records of the false embezzlement claims, restoring his professional reputation and returning his rightful equity stake. Yet, when the independent receiver and I offered to transition him into the chief executive role, my younger son calmly shook his head and declined the office. "I don't want the chair they tried to kill me for," Nathan told me quietly, standing in the newly renovated boardroom where the power structure had been permanently decentralized. Instead, a newly formed employee advocacy trust took control of the voting shares, placing strict safety protocols and independent audits directly under the oversight of workforce representatives. The company survived, but its absolute monarchy was gone forever. Late in the autumn, months after the final court documents were signed and sealed, Nathan and I drove back down to Seabrook Point. The coastal air carried a crisp, sharp bite, smelling heavily of wet pine and distant ocean salt. The beach house remained standing, its gray cedar siding weathered by the wind. The old boathouse had been thoroughly scrubbed and repaired under judicial supervision, transformed into a modest marine safety and training workshop, rather than left to rot as a monument to family tragedy. I unlocked the heavy front door, stepping inside the quiet hallway, where Claire's calendar still hung on the corkboard, now frozen in time. Nathan walked out to the backyard, his boots crunching softly against the oyster shell path, stopping directly in front of the rusted iron perimeter gate. I followed him outside, carrying a small can of industrial machine oil. The afternoon sun cast long, bruised shadows across the damp grass. "You should keep the property," I said, holding the oil can out toward him. "Your mother wanted you to have a place of your own here." Nathan looked at the small metal can, then shook his head. "I don't want to own it alone. Let's put it in a family trust that cannot be sold for 20 years. A place where we can come back to fish or talk without a corporate boardroom breathing down our necks." He pulled the heavy brass key from his jacket pocket and placed it squarely into my open palm. His fingers brushed against mine for a fleeting second, not a warm, effortless embrace of complete forgiveness, but a cautious, deliberate acknowledgement that we were allowed to start over. "Don't lock it again," Nathan said softly. I nodded, stepping forward to the iron gate. I poured a few drops of oil into the stiff, rusted hinges and worked the heavy metal back and forth until the squealing friction completely vanished. The deep brown scars of rust remained stamped into the ironwork, proving that time could not erase the damage of the past. But the gate swung wide open, moving effortlessly under my hand. I turned back toward the house, and from the open doorway, I heard my son's voice carrying across the quiet yard. "Dad," Nathan called out, testing the word like it was a brand new tool. I did not freeze. I did not hold my breath in fear. I dropped the oil can onto the grass and walked back toward the house, stepping across the threshold to answer him. When the courtroom doors finally closed and the federal sentences were handed down, the grand empire we built lost its illusion of perfection, leaving behind a stark, undeniable truth. Wealth and corporate power do not protect a family from ruin. Instead, they act as a magnifying glass for our worst flaws. We spent decades hiding behind polished mahogany desks and locked gates, pretending that silence equaled stability. But a legacy built on a foundation of ruthless ambition and unacknowledged mistakes is never truly secure. The heaviest price of our obsession with control was not the money or the title, but the 7 stolen years we can never get back. True accountability starts the moment you stop defending your pride And finally, look at the damage you allowed to happen right in front of you. It is easy to point fingers at the villains who executed the betrayal. But the real lesson lies in recognizing how our own impatience and blind trust laid down the very bricks of the trap. When you refuse to listen to warnings because they inconvenience your schedule, or when you choose corporate reputation over human integrity, you invite destruction into your own home. Redemption does not come from a grand apology or a legal victory. It requires the quiet, daily work of showing up, dismantling your own ego, and accepting that some relationships can never be fully restored overnight. You cannot lock away the ugly parts of your past and expect them to stay buried forever. Sooner or later, the tide rises, the doors are forced open, and you are left standing in the wreckage, forced to decide whether you will rebuild the same fragile walls or leave the gates wide open to the truth. Ask yourself this: how many times have you kept your own gates locked against a difficult truth just to keep up appearances? And what are you truly afraid you might find waiting for you on the other side?